My grandfather, Thomas, pressed his finger against my laptop screen so hard the LCD rippled with purple distortions. He demanded to see the place where ordinary people share their thoughts with the world, specifically with strangers. In his left hand, he gripped a faded, dog-eared photograph of our veranda. He was newly 70, and until tonight he had steered clear of computers, genuinely baffled by their place in a home already equipped with a radio and morning papers. But a stubborn light burned in his eyes, masking the heavy, 6-month-old grief left behind by my grandmother's passing. I minimized my quarterly report, closed the open tabs, and set up an account for him. 3 days later, our small kitchen in suburban Columbus became a proving ground for his patience. Thomas sat at the table, his thick, calloused carpenter's fingers hovering over the keyboard with the tense precision of someone about to drive nails into solid oak. The machine frustrated him, repeatedly rejecting his username choices. He kept trying to type Olivia, but the system demanded numbers and special characters. The world, it turned out, was already crowded with thousands of Olivias. I explained password criteria while sliding a plate of burnt toast out of his mouthpath. He muttered at his cooling black coffee and the absurdity of these digital locks. Eventually, with the meticulous care of a draftsman mapping a blueprint, he used a graphite pencil to sketch an @ symbol in his paper notebook. He recorded every step I took. Watching his curved, gray-haired spine, I figured the face would last a week, at most, before the keys defeated him. By week 2, he had abandoned the television. The evening car restoration shows that used to be his post-dinner ritual now played on mute, a faint flicker in the background. Thomas unearthed an old digital camera I had gifted him for an anniversary years ago and began disappearing into the backyard for hours. From the living room window, I watched him grunt as he knelt in the dry grass before the rose bushes. He and Olivia had planted that garden 30 years ago, right after we moved to Ohio. He would freeze, camera raised, trapping the amber evening light on the petals. In those moments, the sharp line between his brows smoothed out, and his hands grew remarkably gentle. He searched for the exact angle where the blooms looked alive, as if Grandma had merely set down her watering can and stepped inside for a glass of lemonade. The full picture emerged late one night. Heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, I caught a sliver of blue light slicing through the crack of his bedroom door. Thomas sat before the monitor in a pair of oversized headphones, hunting and pecking at the keys with a single finger, occasionally pausing to rub his strained eyes. The next morning, I pulled up his profile on my phone. There were no grand manifestos or complex essays, just a single photograph of the roses framing an empty wicker bench. Below it, he wrote simply about how Olivia always insisted on watering the garden before dusk, so the scent would carry through the night. He noted that he'd kept the routine, and the yard still smelled of her, but the bench had become far too wide for one person. He closed by, saying that if anyone out there felt lonely, they should know an old man in Ohio was thinking of them. The unadorned honesty of those words stilled my breath. By the end of the month, the unexpected happened. The digital algorithms caught the genuine warmth of his posts, and his follower count surged past 40,000. When I showed him the screen filled with an endless scroll of notifications, Thomas merely nudged his glasses up his nose, bewildered. To him, the metrics were abstract, just faceless data. I sat down beside him and, reading the comments aloud, told him about a young woman in Seattle who had lost her father and found his familiar voice in Thomas's captions. I shared the message from a guy in Manchester who was on the verge of quitting everything until he read Thomas's post about a storm-damaged apple tree that managed to bloom anyway. My grandfather listened in silence, staring past the monitor. Then he slowly removed his glasses and spent a long time wiping the lenses with the hem of his flannel shirt, trying to steady his trembling hands. He never expected his quiet, private morning to serve as a life raft for strangers. Last night I checked on him again. Outside, the maples rustled against a light summer rain, while Thomas sat in his usual chair. He no longer fought the keyboard. He was carefully typing out words of encouragement, letter by letter, to a woman in Detroit who had recently been left entirely alone and dreaded the coming winter. All the protective warmth and residual love that had gathered dust in our quiet house for months was now rippling outward across the globe in thin, invisible threads. I stood at the threshold, watching his silhouette bathed in the monitor's glow, and gently pulled the door shut. A quiet, steady pride settled in, knowing that without ever leaving our kitchen, an old man had managed to bring warmth to so many lonely hearts across a vast planet. I was walking back from Trader Joe's, lugging a heavy paper bag of groceries in my right hand. The suburban street was pretty quiet, until this elderly woman turned the corner and started heading my way. She had to be pushing 80 at least. Moving slow, shuffling along in these beat-up gray sneakers, wearing this oversized wool cardigan that just hung on her. I noticed her looking at me from way down the block. As we got closer, her pace slowed even more. She shifted this little glass jar from her left hand to her right. I stopped a few feet away, kind of knowing she wanted to say something. She stopped too, caught her breath, and asked real soft if I wanted to buy some homemade jam from her. She held it out. You could see the dark berries through the glass. And there was this crudely taped paper label with messy handwriting I couldn't read. And man, something just hit me right in the chest. My breath caught, and this huge, soft knot formed in my throat. I looked at her hands, thin, spotted with age, knobby knuckles, trembling just a little from the weight of that tiny jar. And this wave of pure, sharp pity washed over me. I had to work hard not to tear up right there. That helplessness just got to me. I quickly set my grocery bag down on the asphalt, unzipped my jacket, and pulled out my wallet. Grabbed a 20 and put it right into her dry, rough palm, kind of closing her fingers over it. I told her to keep the jar, that I didn't even eat sweets anyway, which was a total lie. I just wanted to help. She tried to push the jar back toward me, saying I should take it since I paid for it. But I just stepped back and shook my head. She looked at the bill, then up at me. Her lips moved and she whispered thanks. I scooped up my bag and walked off quickly, trying to hide the tears that were threatening to spill. 2 weeks later, I saw her again, near the same spot. This time she was sitting on a low concrete curb by the parking lot, an old cloth bag on her lap. I recognized the gray cardigan right away. I walked over, pulled out a 10 and held it out. She looked up, a flicker of vague recognition in her eyes, and said a quiet thank you as she tucked the money into her coat pocket. And that wasn't the last time. Over the next few months, I must have run into her 4 more times. Same scene every time. Sometimes by the pharmacy wall, sometimes shuffling along the fence, always holding that little glass jar of dark jam. I stopped making excuses and just handed her the cash. I'd started keeping some set aside in my right pocket before leaving the house. People would walk by, glued to their phones, not even noticing her. Once a security guard from the store next door gave me this disapproving shake of his head. She never asked me for anything, but she always took the money with a quiet grace and a small nod. Almost a year went by. Life just went on. Work, errands, the usual. I started taking a different, shorter route to the office, so I didn't go that way as much. The old woman kind of faded to the back of my mind. Then one weekday, I needed to stop at that pharmacy. Walking down the familiar sidewalk, I automatically put my right hand in my jeans pocket, expecting those folded bills I used to keep there. But it was completely empty. That little habit made me stop dead in the middle of the walkway. I almost bumped into a guy behind me. I looked around. The low curb by the parking lot was empty. Just some kid on a skateboard scrolling on his phone. Nobody by the pharmacy wall either. Just two office types in suits. Power walking past, chatting loudly about financial charts. I stood there for a good minute, scanning the faces of every older person I saw. None of them were her. And that's when it hit me. Clear and sharp and scary. I hadn't seen her in months, maybe more. I tried to remember the last time, but all I could picture were fuzzy snapshots from last fall. Her standing there, hands tucked into her sleeves, against the cold. The reality of it landed with a heavy, dull thud. She was way past 80, could barely walk, and her just disappearing from that little patch of pavement didn't leave much room for wishful thinking. A deep sadness settled in my chest, this tight, heavy feeling. The city noise went on around me, cars humming by, people rushing, nobody paying me any mind. The city didn't care that one quiet, fragile life had just stopped, faded away without a trace. I pulled my hand out of that empty pocket and walked it on, knowing that street would never feel the same. My shift ended around 8, but I didn't get home until nearly 10:30. Had to stay late and fix the threading on 2 blanks. Couldn't leave them for morning. I tossed my jacket on the stool by the door, headed to the kitchen, put the kettle on. Only then did I really hear the silence. Barnaby wasn't there. No cat weaving around my ankles. I found him on the couch in the living room corner, lying still, breathing fast and shallow. I touched his nose. He opened his eyes a crack but didn't even try to get up. I fumbled for my phone, pulled up my contacts, found the vet clinic. Too late for office hours, so I figured I'd leave a voice message, explain the symptoms, ask them to call back in the morning. But standing over Barnaby, trying to figure out what to say, something else floated up in my head. Not words exactly. More like the tune my mother used to hum when I was sick as a kid. I sat down on the floor right next to him, leaned against the couch and hit record. The lullaby came out quiet. A little embarrassed, honestly. I was singing under my breath because the walls are paper thin. It ran over 3 minutes. Barnaby didn't move, but his breathing steadied a bit. I decided to take that as a good sign. I sent the file, already closing the app, and that's when I saw it. The last digit was wrong. Not an 8, a 7. I stared at the screen for maybe 5 seconds. Message delivered. Somewhere across the country, a complete stranger had just received a 3-minute recording of a guy singing a lullaby to his cat in an empty kitchen. I typed out a quick text apology. Wrong number, sorry for bothering you, and went to bed. Crash it hard, no dreams, morning. Phone face down on the desk. I didn't even remember at first. Made coffee, checked on Barnaby. He'd moved to the armchair. Even ate a little from his bowl. Then I picked up the phone. A notification had come in at 2 in the morning from that same wrong number. Illinois area code. I hit play. At first, I couldn't process what I was hearing. A woman's voice, raspy, pauses between words. She wasn't talking to me. You could tell immediately. She was talking into the void because there was nowhere else to go. She'd been called into her manager's office Friday afternoon, asked to hand in her badge by end of day. 8 months in a city where she didn't know anyone except co-workers. And now she didn't have co-workers either. Her voice broke a few times. She'd go quiet, and you could hear her breathing, steadying herself, then continue. She talked about her rented apartment, rent paid through the month, not knowing what came next. At the end, she said she'd gotten someone's lullaby around 11:30 that night, said it was strange, and that for some reason it kept her from completely falling apart. I listened twice, standing by the window, coffee gone cold in my hand. Felt invasive, honestly, like I'd stumbled into someone else's evening, their panic. But I also understood she hadn't replied to complain. She'd answered because at that moment it was the only living signal coming from outside. I texted her back. No call. Just wrote that I'd heard her, that I was sorry, and that the cat seemed to be doing better. She answered with one word. Good, 3 years. That's a lot of short sounds. I never counted, but if you strung them all together, you'd get something like a continuous chronicle of 2 parallel lives that never physically crossed, but stopped being strangers a long time ago. I'd send her the hiss of my coffee machine in the morning. She'd reply with the creak of the old armchair she read in. Barnaby sometimes purred straight into the mic when he settled on my lap, and she once wrote that her dog Buster would lift his head at that sound and stare at the phone, genuinely confused. Then Buster photos started coming. Ginger, Shiggy, one ear permanently sticking up. I'd send back shots from the shop, fresh blanks, sometimes just the view from my window onto the fire escape. She'd send pages from books, not photos of text, but short retellings in her own words of what had hooked her and why. We never called each other directly. I thought about why. What we had existed in a very specific format, and changing it meant risking everything falling apart. A live conversation would demand speed, reactions, awkward pauses. An audio file, you can replay it, stop it, answer once the words have actually formed. We both knew this, though we never discussed it. Barnaby passed in early March, quietly in his sleep. I found him in the armchair that morning and just sat there for several minutes, not moving. Then I sent her one sentence. She didn't text back, she sent a voice message. Very short, under a minute. Just said she heard me and stayed silent into the mic. That was enough. The box showed up on my porch 4 days later. Heavy, wrapped in brown packing tape. Her name in the return address. Inside was a blanket, Gray, thick-knit, clearly handmade. The edges uneven in that way things get when they're made without rushing. Underneath, a small card. She'd written that she'd knitted it during winter evenings while Buster slept by the radiator, and that she hadn't known why she was knitting it or who it was for. Now she knew. I unfolded it right there in the entryway, sat on the floor, leaned against the wall, and realized that for 3 years I'd been afraid of exactly one thing: that reality would turn out to be smaller than what had grown in the space between us. The blanket was warm and smelled of someone else's home, and that smell somehow dissolved everything. I bought a ticket the next week. We arranged it by text. Platform 3, 1:30. I'd be in the blue jacket. I got there early, grabbed a tea in a paper cup from a kiosk, and waited. I heard her before I saw her. That same raspy laugh I knew from accidental background recordings, times she'd laughed at something without turning off the mic. She was talking to the ticket inspector at the turnstile. I turned around, and it was her. No gap at all between the voice from the speaker and the living person. We got married 9 months later in a small room at City Hall. 2 witnesses, no reception, signatures on 3 forms. That evening, in the new place we rented together, I took out our old phones and set them in a wooden frame I'd made myself. 2 screens side by side, shoulder to shoulder. She asked why. I said they were the only things that knew the whole story from the beginning. She looked at the frame, then at me, and didn't say anything. That was enough, too.